All right. Well, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. I wish my mother was one of the participants. She would have loved it. Thank you. Thank you, Emily, and thank you, Relly.
Recorded, so it's all good.
Okay. And thanks to the entire Limud staff, really. It's so heart stirring and moving to see so many of you. I have to evoke the famous verse of King David in the book of Psalms, Hine ma tovu manaim shevet achim gam yachad. Really, it's so good and pleasant to see so many brothers and sisters sitting together virtually and studying together. I see some familiar faces, some not so much, but I feel like I'm already your brother, as mentioned, just by this act of coming together and uniting our minds as one. So, as you know, the title today is Anti-Semitism in General and the Jewish Future. So, to begin just maybe with an anecdote, you may know the story about this anti-Semite who walks into a bar and he sees a Jew sitting on the side, and he's so livid, he's so filled with hatred that he tells the bartender, please, I'd like to order a free drink here on me for everyone in the bar except for that Jew. He orders a drink for everyone. That Jew smile all of a sudden starts growing and he doesn't understand. So he goes back to the bartender and says, please, I want a drink for everyone in the bar on me right here except for that Jew. And that Jew's smile just only grows bigger and brighter. He orders a third drink. At the end, he goes up to the Jew and he says, I don't understand. You're the one being left out. I'm ordering a free drink for everyone except for you. What's your issue? Why do you keep smiling wider and brighter? And he replies, you don't understand. I own this bar, so it's only to my benefit. But friends, I'm reminded of this story really today, because this title of anti-Semitism shouts hatred, but I think it also shouts directly or indirectly the tremendous response that Jews have had to anti-Semitism, not just in our generation, but throughout the ages. So just to put things into the right context, I just want to go over very quickly some of the historical milestones of anti-Semitism, and then we'll delve into how to deal with anti-Semitism altogether, the different approaches we've seen in history, and what should be done today as we face a Jewish future together. I'd like to, if I'm able to, I'd like to share my screen so we can follow the references together in case you haven't received them. And
you're a co-host, so you should be able to just share it.
Fantastic. Beautiful. So I'm going to do this right now. Let's see if it works. Share.
Yeah.
PDF. Very good. Okay. Fantastic. All right. So I hope everyone can see the screen right here. Again, you may have received them, but now we are sharing the screen so we can study really all together from the same text. So it's just some history, some milestone, and we'll go over this very quickly because the point is not to look back. The point in this class is really to look towards the future. So as we all know, maybe the first episode of anti-Semitism in Jewish history was the slavery in Egypt for 210 years. We celebrated this with Passover not too long ago. And finally, we came out of Egypt stronger and more vibrant as a nation. Then the story of Purim, where Haman tried to exterminate the Jewish people. Hanukkah, where the Greek government outlawed the practice of Judaism. They were going more after the soul of Judaism than maybe the body of Judaism as other enemies, as the Romans, for example, even as the Nazis. But that was the Greek government in 138 BCE. Then the famous murder of Jews by Muhammad, or as he was watching the murder of these Jews, 600 Jews in Medina. Jews are expelled from Arabia. The Crusades, there were 5 Crusades altogether. The first Crusade, thousands of Jews were tortured and massacred. The Second Crusade, there are many stories about how entire communities were decimated in Europe, particularly in Germany during the Second Crusade, and in France also. Then you had all sorts of world events that the Jews were blamed for. For example, the Black Plague. They were blamed for that across Europe, and of course that incited independent attacks, not organized attacks maybe like the Crusades, but independent attacks by individuals and communities towards the Jews. Then you had this new trend of expelling Jews throughout history again, but now in the 1200s, in the 1300s, 1400s, from different countries. In 1290, Jews were expelled from England, and by the way, they weren't allowed back for about 400 or 500 years. The Jews started to resettle in England really in the late 1600s, but really as a community maybe in the 1800s. So it took about 600 years for the Jews to come back to England after they were expelled in the year 1290. Then Jews were expelled from France in 1306, not for too long, I think for about 40 years, but still expelled. From Hungary, then Jews were accused of murdering Christian children and baking matzah with the blood, right? Famously known as the blood libel. The first one was in Norwich, England, but that became also a trend all the way throughout Europe for hundreds of years. Maybe the most common one is the Mendel Beilis trial. That Mendel Beilis, that Ukrainian Jew who was accused in the early 1900s of murdering a 13, 14-year-old Russian boy by the name of Andrei Yushevsky. And he was put on trial for 2 years. Thankfully, by the way, he came out innocent. But that was maybe one famous blood libel. Until today, the Jews are accused, thank God it's not believed anymore. But in some parts of the world, Jews are also accused of blood libel. 1492, Jews expelled from Spain, or they were forced to convert, otherwise they had to be expelled. They had to find somewhere else to live. That was the Spanish Inquisition. Shortly thereafter, 3-4 years after that, Jews were expelled from Portugal. The Marranos, those Jews who tried to act as if they did convert, but remain Jews inside, those Marranos, they were discovered. They were called traitors. How dare you cheat the world by remaining loyal to Judaism in the confines of your home? Those people were burnt. But Mexico, Portugal, Peru, Spain, and other places. The Talmud is burned in Italy in 1553. It's burned also in France. It's burned many other places. Then we have the Cossacks and the massacre of the Jews in Russian communities, Ukrainian communities, particularly in Polish communities. You'd be surprised by this, but General Grant, right here in America, expels the Jews from Tennessee in 1862. I'm going through this very quickly again because the focus of this class is more on the future. So we're going, just to put things in context, we're looking at the past. In 1882, pogroms in Russia. Many of them became world famous and are studied until today, like the Kishinev pogrom, for example. 1930s and 40s, during the Second World War, during the evil Holocaust, official Canadian reply, this is one of the many replies to Jewish refugees, but this is one of them, one of the official Canadian replies to most Jewish pleas for refuge was, unfortunately, though we greatly sympathize with your circumstance, at present you cannot be admitted. Please try some other country. And we know of other ships who came to even the shores of America and were refused. 1939, 45, I don't need to tell you, there's 6 million Jews were exterminated throughout Europe and even North Africa, some in North Africa. Babies served as target in Auschwitz alone, 1.5 million Jews were murdered. 1948 to 67, Arab nations launched war after war against the Jewish state. The newly founded Jewish state was founded on May 14, 1948. And then until today, you have in some Arab countries, the study of Hebrew, like Iran, is a crime against the state in the Soviet Union, but that also exists until today. By the way, today, some terrorist groups study the elders, the protocols of the elders of Zion, a made-up document that many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with, that was published in the early 1900s in Russia, was translated very quickly into many languages. By the way, Henry Ford, you should know, another anti-Semitic act, and we can go on and on speaking about the history of anti-Semitism. But Henry Ford was so happy about this hoax, this false book of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, that basically says that the Jews tried to control the world, that he sponsored 500,000 free copies to be published here in America, to be disseminated in 1920, I believe it was. So you have that education of anti-Semitism also that was prevalent throughout history. And to summarize all of this best, I'd like to use the words of the Haggadah that we all know, that in each and every generation they rise against us to destroy us, and the Holy One, blessed be He, rescues us from the hands And not really have non-Jews really tried to destroy us in every generation? The sad truth is that yes, name a generation and I'll name you enemies of the Jewish people that tried to destroy us. I'm sure the historians among us will be able to point out every single incident that did exist, unfortunately, in each and every generation. Amos Oz, who's an Israeli novelist, a brilliant author. If you haven't read some of his books, I do encourage you to, because he speaks very often. He makes you feel as if you're in the Israeli society through his books. But in any case, he wrote also very poignantly that in the 1930s, when we didn't have a Jewish state yet, right, the state of Israel, our enemies said Jews to Palestine. Now they say Jews out of Palestine. And he concluded like this, powerful and very painful words. They don't want us to be here. They don't want us to be there. They don't want us to be. Now, I ask, why anti-Semitism? Why this hatred that has not ceased to exist for so many centuries? Why do people really hate us? What is it about the Jews? Is it our fault? Is it something that we brought to the world that we should have never brought? Why do people really hate Jews? Now, it's a big question, and I want to attempt to answer its entirety over just 45 minutes right now. But I will offer you three theories that exist out there. One that was offered by the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud of about 1,900 years ago. The other one by Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, who was an American Kabbalist, who wrote many, many important books and died at a young age, by the way. I think at the age of 40, yet he achieved so much as far as his authorship of books goes. He has yet another theory. And then there's a theory that was mentioned by Adolf Hitler himself when he was asked about why he hates Jews. Theory number one, right here in the Babylonian Talmud, it stems from a word that represents maybe one of the greatest and most majestic events in Jewish history, an event that we are about to re-celebrate this coming week. As you all know, Thursday night, Friday, and Shabbat is the festival of Shavuot, where we relive the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai. But that name given to that mountain, Mount Sinai, may be alluding to the reason why so many people have hated us throughout generations. The word Sinai itself. And it's interpreted here in a very interesting way by the Talmud. It says as follows: the Hebrew pronunciation of Sinai is almost identical to the Hebrew word for hatred, which is Sinah. Sinah, Sinai, almost the same word. So it goes and asks this question: why was the Torah given on a mountain called Sinai? Asks the Talmud. Because the great Sinah, again the same word, the great hatred, the tremendous hatred at the Jew, emanates from Sinai. So in other words, the Talmud is offering you a theory that you may agree with, a theory that you may disagree with. But the reason that the Jewish people are so hated throughout generations now is because of what happened on Sinai. We received the Torah, almost a GPS for life, and many disagree with this GPS. Why? Maybe because this GPS demands a higher standard of living. Maybe because this GPS is all about morality, and some people are immoral at their core. Not at their birth, but maybe at their core, they've become immoral. Whatever the reason is, but this Torah is the reason why so many people hate us. Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan has a similar theory, and he gives an analogy to explain maybe what the Talmud is saying here. And he says as follows: say you are given an island inhabited by several belligerent tribes, where there is much suffering caused by war, poverty, and prejudice. Your assignment, which is, by the way, the analogy for this world, the world that could be seen like one big jungle. Now, your assignment in this world is to play God and improve the society, teaching its members to live together in harmony, thereby reducing or eliminating suffering. So he says as follows: you will achieve this by deploying a group of undercover infiltrators to achieve the divine goal without revealing your identity. These infiltrators will always be in a position of great peril. You see the analogy now? The analogy is, this is the Jewish people. We have to infiltrate this jungle, play God. Let's not reveal identity too much. And very often Jews did not reveal their identities, maybe because they weren't allowed to. But yet they had to play this role of bringing morality to the world. Operating now on a different value system, that it would always be considered outsiders. The more their message diverged from that of the majority, the more they would be resented. Scattered throughout the island to spread the message, they would very likely become a persecuted minority. I would use a different analogy based on this analogy that I'm sure many of you experienced this yourself, but I didn't because I wasn't such a good student. I mean, at times throughout my school years, sometimes yes, sometimes no. But the A+ student in school or in a class is not always liked by his peers, his or her peers. Why? Because he's the goody-goody of the class. It's almost as if that A+ student is reminding the others of their deficiencies because they're not A+. So people don't like the A+, the goody-goody of the class. This is the analogy that Rabbi Kaplan is using right here. Maybe people hate Jews because they are the goody-goodies of the world, or at least they have to act as such. They have to, in his words, play God. And that, of course, obviously reminds people of their own deficiencies. And people are not willing very often to own the deficiencies. They're comfortable with the deficiencies. And the people remind them of their deficiencies are automatically hated by those people. Interesting theory. I'm not going to say, and I'll leave it up to you, I'm not going to say whether I agree with it or disagree with it. But it's a theory that ought to be really contemplated. And to follow this theory, Hitler himself was once asked why he hated Jews. And he revealed hate Jews because of two reasons. Because they brought to the world conscience and circumcision. And in his words, conscience is a Jewish invention like circumcision. My task is to free men from the dirty and degrading ideas of conscience and morality. In other words, because Jews brought morality to the world and conscience to the world, in his words, I hate them. Again, almost similar to this idea of this A+ student, we don't like him. He reminds us of our own immoralities, we don't like him. Now, again, you may agree with these theories, you may disagree with them, something to think about. But I will add to this before we go to the responses that we found throughout the history and the responses that are needed today to fight anti-Semitism. I will add to this that if these theories are correct, just think about this, these theories are correct, it indirectly means that there's nothing much we can do about ridding the world from anti-Semitism. Because if the Jews are the representatives of God in this world by teaching the Torah to the world, everyone is a representative of God in the world, Jews and non-Jews alike. But we have this doctrine to teach to the world, this Torah. We almost have this calling by the prophet, if you remember those words, to be a light unto the nations. So then it's an integral part of our identity, of who we are. And if the Torah is an integral part of who we are, then there's nothing much we can do. What, are we going to rid ourselves of that Torah, rid ourselves of that light, so that now the rest of the people in our classroom can like us? Is the A+ student going to stop being an A+ student just to be liked? No, the A+ needs to be an A+ student. The Jew needs to be a Jew. And if that's the case, because he's a Jew, he will be hated. That means that hatred will always exist. Now, can we minimize it or not minimize it? That's a different question. But if we say that these theories are correct, it indirectly means, think about this, that Jewish hatred will forever exist, just like that Jewish Torah will forever exist. That's something to think about. But the question now that I really want to delve into during our short time together today is how are we to respond as Jews to this anti-Semitism, to Jewish hatred? Before we go into the three responses that I believe have existed throughout history and still exist today, three distinct responses, I want to share with you one of the most soul-stirring stories told about Rabbi Yekutiel Yehuda Halberstam. You may have heard his name, but he's a Holocaust survivor who is a giant of our history, but of our generation in particular. He himself lost his wife and his 11 children in the Holocaust. They were all murdered by the Nazis. He survived miraculously. The story is truly miraculous. But when he came out of Auschwitz, he had to rebuild not just his own personal life, and he did indeed remarry and had 7 children. But he also had to rebuild his Hasidic dynasty, the Tzans, also known as the Kloisenberg Hasidic dynasty, which he did almost from scratch. Every single one of them during the Holocaust were decimated. And he came and he rebuilt that Hasidic dynasty. Today, there are tens of thousands of Tzans Hasidim in the world, really thanks to him, because of his tremendous conviction and determination after the war. But not only did he do all of that, he also built a children's hospital, where in Israel, in Netanya, known until today as the Laniado Hospital, that was invented, created, founded, established by Rabbi Allouche. But one of the stories about him, there are thousands of stories about him, and really he's a remarkable human being, is a story that speaks maybe to this idea at the core of the Jewish identity, this idea of conscience and morality. And the story is told about how one Nazi officer one day in the middle of the Holocaust singled him out. Of course, they would go after the leaders because they understood what many of our enemies understood, that if you go after the leaders, then the followers will eventually disappear, right? If you cut the head of a body, then the body ceases to exist. So they went after the leaders. One of these Nazi officers therefore singled Rabbi Allouche out of a crowd and started torturing him in front of everyone. And he beat Rabbi Halberstam, and as he was beating him, he was asking him, Rabbi, do you still believe that you are the chosen nation? And he answered without skipping a beat, yes, I do. So the officer responded with even more beating. The rabbi was lying on the floor, and again, he was asked, do you still believe that you're the chosen nation? And again, he responded, yes, very firmly. So the officer again responded with even more beating, was lying in his own pool of blood. Eventually he was asked the third time, do you still believe after all of this that you're the chosen nation? And he responded so powerfully, he said, as long as we are not the ones beating and humiliating others, then we will forever be the chosen nation. Which reminds us again of our duty. Being a Jew is a responsibility to carry morality, to carry light onto the world. And as long as we can do that, we are the chosen nation. How do you define a chosen nation? That's a different discussion for a different time. I don't believe chosen nation means better nation. Chosen doesn't mean better. Why that? And I'll put this as a side note, and then we'll go to the responses, because if you think about this, in English, we often confuse the words prefer and choose. But when I prefer something over something else, it's because I see attributes in that thing that I'm preferring that I don't see in the thing that I'm not preferring. So for example, if I like apple juice if someone offers me apple juice or orange juice, I am not going to choose between the orange juice and the apple juice. I'm going to prefer one over the other because I'm going to think about what attributes I like in the apple juice, say, over the orange juice. And therefore, ultimately, this will be a preference, not a choice. This preference might be guided by predetermined notions, by the way I was educated. But eventually, it will be a preference. Myself, my being, will prefer the apple juice over the orange juice. That's a preference. Most choices that we make in life are really preferences. Why do I choose to become a lawyer? Maybe because that's the way I was raised. Maybe because that's the skills that God gave me. So automatically it's a preference. It's not a choice. What is a choice? A choice is between two identical things. That's a choice. Otherwise it's a preference. Like, just prove it. If I have to choose between these two cups, they're identical, then it's a choice. Now, if this cup all of a sudden is filled with orange juice and this one is apple juice, then it doesn't become a choice anymore. So when we say that we're the chosen nation, it doesn't mean better nation. It actually means that we're identical to others because it's a choice. Otherwise, we would be the preferred nation. So being the chosen nation means that we're just like other nations. We were just given this task, this morality, this conscience, this Torah to teach to the world. And as long as we can stick with that responsibility, as Rabbi Halberstam was saying, we will remain not the preferred. It doesn't exist. The chosen nation. In any case, going back now to anti-Semitism and the three responses we have found throughout history on how to combat this hatred, this Jew hatred. The first one the second one and the third one are very, very distinct, yet you will see, think about it yourself as we go through them, that we have found each and every one of them in each and every generation. Now, these three responses, I believe, are rooted in the very first act of anti-Semitism in world history. If I were to ask you, what is the first act of anti-Semitism in world history? What do you think it is? Well, I know you're muted. I'm sorry, I forgot. But it is that biblical story of Moses. Moses, the prince of Egypt, right, comes out of the palace. He goes for a stroll in the streets of Egypt, and he sees an Egyptian beating a Jew. That's an act of anti-Semitism. What does Moses do? Moses can't remain indifferent. So what does he do? He goes, he looks, first of all, to make sure that no one is watching him. And then he struck, I'm reading here from the reference, so he struck the Egyptian, killed him basically, and hit him in the sand. All right? That was the first act of anti-Semitism. Now, the Midrash has to ask the question, how did Moses kill the Egyptian? I have to ask you, does it really make a difference? I mean, I know that Jews love to ask questions, but we have to question everything. We have to fight about everything. So what difference does it make how he killed the Egyptian? But I think the Midrash is asking this question because what it is essentially asking is not really how Moses killed the Egyptian, but what method did Moses choose to use in order to combat anti-Semitism? And yeah, you have three opinions, again, three responses that were found throughout history altogether. The first one is Rabbi Evyatar. Rabbi Evyatar says he killed him, he responded to anti-Semitism with his fist. We'll develop this idea in just a second. The other one, others say, no, he killed him with a shovel of cement. That's another response, different type. The rabbis say he had a third response. He mentioned the mystical name of God. In other words, that secret name, and mystically, that's how he killed him. Now, I do believe, and again, we'll have some time for Q&A afterwards, feel free to disagree with me, but I do believe that these are the three responses that we have used throughout history to combat anti-Semitism, as Moses used right there and then during that incident. The first response was Jews saying, well, we faced anti-Semitism, let's respond with a fist. Let's use force. Force needs to meet force in order to be able to triumph. Let's show the world how strong and how mighty we are. Is it an illegitimate or legitimate response? I'll leave that up to you. I think it's legitimate. In many cases, if it's used correctly, if it's used legally also, then yes, it could be a very good and legitimate response. I think the epitome story maybe that epitomizes this use of force to fight anti-Semitism is a beautiful story here, that was written by Ari Shavir in Haaretz about what happened in April of 2003 over the concentration camp of Auschwitz by the IDF, by Air Force fighters of the IDF. And this is a story, it's a riveting story. It happened 7 years ago in April 2003. I'm reading his words. But for me, it will be a moment to remember. More than half a century after his grandmother was killed at Auschwitz, Israel Brigadier General Amir Eshel flew over the Auschwitz-Birkenau death camp in an F-15 fighter jet, despite great opposition from the Auschwitz authorities. Some of you may remember, there's a YouTube about this, by the way. 2 other Israeli aircraft, also piloted by descendants of Holocaust survivors, took part in the flyover, timed to coincide with a ceremony at Birkenau with 200 Israeli soldiers. Imagine, shortly after the Holocaust comes the IDF and fills this camp that represented destruction of the Jewish people with everything that represents construction of the Jewish people. As they stood at attention, despite the heavy cloud cover, the soldiers on the ground could reportedly see the blue Star of David painted on the bottom of the planes. Just imagine the scene. On the site where close to 2 million Jews were slaughtered during World War II, and over the objections of the National Museum of Auschwitz-Birkenau, the Polish institution located at the camps, the Israelis decided they needed to do it just to make a statement. Now listen to this exchange. It's a cemetery, a place of silence and concentration, said museum spokeswoman Jaroslav Mansfeld. Flying the F-15s is a demonstration of military might, which is an entirely inappropriate way to commemorate the victims, she was telling the IDF. And they responded as follows. Really, Mrs. Mansfeld? A place of silence? 1 million children were screaming in these gas chambers, holding onto their mothers' helpless arms as they cried and begged for oxygen. Is this your definition of silence? Look at the scratches at the ceilings of the gas chambers, demonstrating the agony of the victims during the final moments. That's silence? So we will show you a show of might, a show of strength. It's almost reminiscent of that verse, Hashem oz la'amo yiten, Hashem yivarech et amo b'shalom. God will bless his nation with that oz, with that might. That might was a response that we found to anti-Semitism throughout history. I mean, I'm sure you can think of many other examples. I can think of the Warsaw Ghetto Rebellion, right? They wanted a show of might. We're not gonna lie in silence here, suffering and watching our brothers and sisters die. We're gonna fight back. And that show of might very often was used throughout, again, history. There are thousands of examples I can bring, but that was one particular response to anti-Semitism. The second response, I'm going to skip this verse. The second response was the response of the shovel. Remember that other opinion was that Moses killed the Egyptian with a shovel of cement. What does that mean? Some people said, no, it's not so much the might, that oz, that strength, that military might maybe, that will triumph over anti-Semitism. It's quite the opposite. The building of the Jewish people. It's not enough to know what we are fighting against. We also have to know what we are fighting for. And therefore, let's focus inward and build institutions that represent the best of the Jewish world. There's that famous line from the Talmud that is seen, by the way, over institutions across the United States. I've seen it in many places and across the world. But as my forefathers planted them for me, so I plant for my children. It's that idea that I have to be building and building and building. It's interesting. I mean, I can quote Henry Heine, who was forced to convert in order to, he called it its ticket to society, that German philosopher and writer. But he writes, from the nature of my thinking, you can determine that baptism is a matter of indifference to me. Yeah, again, he was forced to baptize and then he was accepted as a writer and as a philosopher. But he said, I don't care about baptism. It's just a matter of indifference to me, and I do not regard it as important, even symbolically. My becoming a Christian is a ticket of admissions to European culture. And then he went on to say, that's what gave me that ticket. But I want the world to know that Jews are made of something, that they represent the best of society. So I'm just going to baptize myself, and I'll continue to be the best writer and the best philosopher I can be. I'll build myself, my name. And in that way, the Jewish name will also be built by that shovel. And then we'll fight and prevail over anti-Semitism. So that's another response. You know, speaking of building, it reminds me of that, that story of this Jew was stuck in between two cowboys from Texas in a plane. Remember those days when we would be able to sit together in a plane? Now we're social distancing everywhere. But during those days when we were still able to sit together in rows of three, there was this Jew stuck between two cowboys. One cowboy started speaking to the other cowboy over the Jew. One said to the other cowboy, so tell me, what do you do in Texas? He says, I own a ranch. And it's so successful, I raised 2,000 cattle. And my ranch is so big that they call it after me. My name is John. They call it John's Ranch. And the John then says to the other cowboy, what do you do? And the guy says, it's funny, I also own a huge ranch, and it's 10,000 square feet, 10,000, whatever it is. I also raise 5,000 cattle, this and that, and it's huge. And I also call it after me. They call it Billy's Ranch because it's so big, and I'm the owner of it. I'm so proud of it. Then they turn to the Jew that's stuck in between, and they say to him, what do you do? He says, I don't own such a big ranch, just a small piece of land. And you raise any cattle? He says, no, I live in Texas. I don't own a ranch, and I'm sorry to tell you, I don't raise cattle. He says, gosh, so what do they call your piece of land? He says, oh, that's easy. They call it downtown Dallas. That's what I own. But a lot of Jews had that philosophy. Let's build buildings upon buildings. Let's build our good names. And that's how we'll fight anti-Semitism. That's why maybe we find a disproportionate amount of Nobel Prize winners that are Jewish throughout history, because that was one of our passions, to build our names, to use that shovel and fight anti-Semitism just by showing what we truly stand for, not just stand against. The third response was a different response altogether. It was the response of the voice. That's the third way. If you recall, the Midrash says that Moses called that killed that Egyptian. He used that mystical name of God. What does that mean? It's reminiscent of that reverberating verse in Genesis. The voice is the voice of Jacob, and the hand is the hand of Esau. What this means, without going into all the references, what this means is that some Jews thought that no, the might won't do it, the shovel won't do it. What will do it? If we focus inwards also, and we continue to study Torah. We enclose ourselves in ghettos, and we build yeshivas, and all we do is study Torah and Torah and Torah. You have this phenomenon until today in Bnei Brak, Israel, in Borough Park, New York, in many other places. People will tell you, no, the Torah is going to save us. They quote the Talmud in the Tractate of Sota that says that the Torah magne umatzle, the Torah defends you and saves you. That voice, as long, doesn't matter if we have an IDF or don't have an IDF, doesn't matter if we're building buildings or not, as long as we are dedicated to this voice and study it and study it and study it, that we will prevail over anti-Semitism. I'm reminded of the story of Mr. Nagar. Mr. Nagar was the hangman of Eichmann. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but the hangman of Eichmann had his identity concealed as the hangman of Adolf Eichmann. Adolf Eichmann, that Nazi, right, who was caught by the Mossad in Argentina, put on trial, and then sentenced to death in Israel, the only death sentence that they ever carried out. But his hangman's identity was concealed for 40 years because they were afraid that neo-Nazis would take their revenge and then find him and kill him. So for 40 years, and not too long ago, I think in 2005 or something like that, his identity was finally revealed. And he's a short Yemenite Jew, who, by the way, for a living, what does he do? He's a shochet. He's a slaughterer of animals to make them kosher, which fits the profile of a hangman. But in any case, the first time his identity was revealed to the world, he was approached by a German media channel, TV channel, asked to interview him. And he agreed. And he said, but I will ask you to interview me in the kollel, in that house of study that I study in each and every day. Not in your office, not in my office. I need you to film me with the background of so many voices studying Torah. And they asked him why. We'll do that, but why? And Shlomo Nagar, that's his name, you can again Google the story. He said, I'll tell you why. Because when you Germans film me, I want the entire Germany to see that the voice of the Torah was never silenced. Here I am, continuing to study the Torah that Hitler tried to silence. Now, that was the third response held by so many Jews over generations. Unfortunately, though, these three voices, these three types of responses, I must say, as I'm sure you'll agree, were very often so distinct that they were divided. The Jews who believed that we have to study Torah did not agree with the Jews who believed that we have to show force, or that we have to use our shovels and build our names or build buildings. And those who believe that we have to build buildings did not necessarily agree with the people who said that the voice is the way to go, or the might is the way to go. And I have to ask you, therefore, so who was right? Who do you think is right? What is the best response? The response of the fist, the shovel, the voice, or to put it in other words, who was right? Was it Jabotinsky, Joe Lieberman, or the Satmar Rebbe? Who's right? And I have to say, maybe together today, you'll help me in creating a fourth yet similar response to those three responses. Because I do believe that going forward, as we face more and more anti-Semitism across the world, we'll only truly be able to emerge as the voice that prevails, as the people that prevail, if we unite all of these three voices together. Yes, we have to use that legitimate and legal might. Yes, we have to continue to stand for something, not just against something, and build our good names. build the buildings that we build, whether it's synagogues or JCCs or whatever it may be. But we also have to continue to use that voice of the Torah as we are doing right now today at Limud in order to develop our best self and create that light that we were called to be upon the entire world. I'll conclude with this anecdote, but this anecdote that I think represents this united response now that we must have, whether you call it a fourth response or just the three responses finally joining hands together, merging as one, with this anecdote that occurred in 1977. But if you recall, in 1977, just before Passover, the UJH suggested that, I'm reading from the reference here, that at each Seder table, Jews should add an empty chair to commemorate the 6 million who perished during the Holocaust and were absent from the Seder. And for the Jews in the Soviet Union, who could not live openly as Jews and were missing from the Seder, right? In 1977, they were still under the dark cloud of communism. At that time, the late Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson, spoke about it, and he encouraged everyone to follow through with the suggestion of the UJA and add a chair to the Seder table, but with one variation. And he said as follows: let the chair not be empty, let it be full. Invite another Jew who does not have a place to go for Seder night, or a Jew who may have lost interest in Judaism, and let him or her fill that chair at your Seder table. Why? And this is the punchline I want to leave you with, because that is the best response to the Holocaust, and dare I add, to anti-Semitism in general. Not only to remember Jewish life that was, but to rebuild Jewish life so that it is. Our job as Jews is not only to add empty chairs, remembering our destruction, but to add full chairs, filled with Jewish passion, celebration, and commitment. Because Judaism must not only be about memory of destruction, but rather about zest of life and the vision of infusing the world with light and holiness. Indeed, that's what Judaism is about. And the only way, therefore, we can really respond to anti-Semitism in a wholesome way, in a way that will ensure that we continue to emerge as the chosen nation, as the victorious nation over this evil, over this hatred, is by merging these three responses. The merge of the shovel, of the fist, and of the voice will indeed create this passion, this celebration, this commitment towards Judaism in the best of ways, in the most wholesome of ways. And then no doubt anti-Semitism might still exist, but we will be able to overcome it, hopefully even subdue it, and share our light, the light of everything we stand for, not just stand against, to the rest of the world. I want to open this up to any questions you may have. And again, feel free to even share your disagreements, your comments, whatever it may be. Maybe I'll stop share. Let me stop share like this. I can see you all.
We have a couple of comments in the chat.
Yes.
But people can unmute themselves, I believe, and ask a question. And we have about 5 minutes left, you know.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going through the comments now. Hello from Scottsdale, Arizona. Hello, hello. Hi, Sandy. Hi, Kira. Great to see you too. Yes, I was supposed to be with Kira, one of our participants here. It's so good to see you in Paris and in Riga on a Jewish Federation trip. Hopefully we'll do it again soon. But because of coronavirus, we couldn't do it. Okay, hello from Jackson. Hello to everyone from Czech Republic. Wow. Okay, can we get the material? You got it. And let me try to get to the questions. I had no idea Jews had been expelled from Tennessee. Yes, you can Google it. Also from the fact about Henry Ford that I mentioned. It's true, it's shameful. I like this comment, maybe easier to feed your ego than to gather sparks, for some at least. So I think Rabbi Allouche just touched on when discussing Rabbi Kaplan's views, some basic premise put forth by Wade. Okay. Let me try to get to the questions. Oh, here we go. So there's a question here. How were the shovels normally used in the service of Pharaoh's machinations? That may make it even more fitting tool of the destructions. Good point. Going from hand to shovel to voice is more beautiful for the same reason. You're right. I think that actually, almost refines that midrash. If we think of how the shovels were used in Egypt, they were used not just as tools to build, but they was used as tools to destroy. They were used to sometimes hit, whip, kill other Jews. And in a way, us using shovels and channeling the power of the shovel, so to speak, in a good, positive direction, it's almost rectifying that usage, that evil usage of the shovel by the Egyptians. So I like that point, Brandon. Thank you. Okay, I mean, I thank you for the great comments. I really appreciate your kind and flattering and humbling comments. If there are any questions, please feel free to ask them now also. And thank you for sharing the references themselves. I do want to point out that if you don't have any comments now, but you will have one in an hour from now, tomorrow, next week, my email address is on the reference sheet, so feel free to email me. And even if you just want to stay in touch, I'm happy to stay in touch with as many of you as possible. As mentioned at the onset, we're all brothers and sisters dwelling together, so feel free to email me also, really. I'll be happy to hear from every one of you. Any other questions?
We have one here. How can we deal with anti-Semitism in our schools with children being insulted?
Oh, that's really a great question. Yes. Yeah, I see it. Thank you, Emily. It's a good question. I mean, of course, every anti-Semitic act is different and therefore maybe needs to be dealt with differently. You know, it depends whether it's a swastika being sprayed, then I think the authorities need to be called, or whether it's the knee-jerk comment that a classmate just gave my son. How do I deal? Maybe I need to speak with their parents. I think the best way in cases like this, in schools in particular, with children, right? Because that's what the question is about. I think children very often speak anti-Semitism because of mere ignorance. They brainwashed to do so, and they themselves haven't had the courage to actually learn what Judaism is about. So they do so out of mere ignorance. And maybe therefore the best response is to sometimes the school staff can help do this. Actually, those of you who are from Scottsdale know the Chaparral High School. I just dealt with an incident like that a few months ago. A Jew that I know very well was being attacked, and the principal of the school stepped in, and they forced this attacker to learn about the Holocaust, to learn about some of the Jewish values, and not only him, but his whole family, and that changed the whole perspective. I don't think they'll ever re-engage in any anti-Semitic act because they've changed. They've had a complete shift of consciousness. So sometimes it's a matter of education, specifically when it comes from ignorance. Another question here: does being a better Jew help to reduce anti-Semitism? It's a good question. I will quote what Jonathan Sachs, the chief rabbi of Great Britain, said not long ago. It's a phrase I agree with. I think it's a phrase that's psychologically also very true. And he says as follows, that one who respects himself will evoke respect in others. One who disrespects himself will evoke disrespect from others. I think it's true. Psychologically, if you respect yourself, people respect you. They might not like you, but they respect you. If you disrespect yourself, people will disrespect you because you yourself are not respecting yourself. I think it's true. If we respect ourselves as Jews, then people might not like us, but they'll respect us. And that in and of itself, I think, mitigates somehow anti-Semitism. So that's the answer to that question.
We are at 12:50 right now. There are a few other questions that were on here. So maybe those individuals can reach out to the rabbi because I got to open this up for the next session. But thank you so much, Rabbi. Let's give him a round of applause.
No, thank you very much. Thank you. So great to be with all of you. How good and how pleasant it is, truly. And I hope to stay in touch. Again, you have my email in the reference sheets. Thank you, Emily, again, for hosting.
Great.